Speaker, and can I begin by thanking you and the Speaker's Office for granting this adjournment debate to discuss transport issues in Carshalton and Wallington. Along with St Helier Hospital, education and more recently issues relating to coronavirus, transport remains one of the most common things that appear in my postbag, and it is also something that affects me as someone who commutes to this place every day. Sitting within the London Borough, particularly the London Borough of Sutton, there is an assumption that we must be well covered by public transport, but the statistics tell a very different story. Sutton has an average public transport accessibility level, or PTAL, of just 2, with the majority of Carshalton and Wallington ranking at 2, 1 or even 0 in some places. The borough is ranked 29th out of the 32 London boroughs and the City of London in terms of connectivity, and is the only borough in London which doesn't have access to the underground, overground or Crossrail station. We are also not on the map for Crossrail 2. And the only reason we are not dead last for connectivity is because we do technically have access to a tram within the borders. However, I will talk more about that later. And now, notwithstanding the ability to walk, cycle or drive, this means that Carshalton and Wallington residents have a choice between limited bus and national rail services when travelling by public transport. Now, you may argue that this is because of reflecting the borough's contribution towards the Mayor's council tax precept, which stands at 28th out of the 32 London boroughs. However, this argument immediately falls down because the remaining 4 boroughs have received higher funding and have greater connectivity than Sutton. This poor level of access to transport cannot continue. As the population of Sutton continues to grow, our ability to have economic growth, access services and indeed play our part in tackling the climate crisis is severely stunted without better transport connections. Carshalton and Wallington is in a London borough. The London borough is the 8th most economically active in London, and it is time that we had investment in our transport networks which reflect those realities and allow us to reach our full potential. Turning first to rail connectivity, my constituency is home to Carshalton, Wallington, Hackbridge and Carshalton Beaches stations, providing northbound services to central London and southbound services to Sutton, Epsom and beyond. Now, of course, reliability is always an issue that is raised by members in this House and is no different for me, and I will be working constructively with Southern and Tramlink, who are the rail operating companies that serve my constituency, to ensure that improvements continue to be made. And I would also be grateful if the Minister could comment on the work the government is doing to ensure greater reliability on our rail network. However, one of the primary issues for my constituents is actually rail frequency. Prior to lockdown, peak services would be full by the time they reach our local stations, meaning an uncomfortable or even a delayed journey for many, pushing some to reconsider using the rail network or even reconsider their employment in order to avoid it. And having met with GTR and Network Rail since being elected, it is clear to me that there are 2 primary issues that prevent additional services being run on our lines. The first is something that I know many colleagues have raised in this House, which is the infrastructure on the railway, which is often in places so outdated that it prevents trains from being turned around as quickly as they are on the London Underground, for example, allowing additional time and space for more trains to be put on the line. Therefore, I'd be grateful for any comments that the Minister has about updating our rail infrastructure, including things such as digital signalling, electrification and joint command centres between rail operating companies and Network Rail. Nevertheless, it appears congestion is the real barrier to running additional services. Many, if not most, of my services run through Selhurst Junction, which is currently massively congested, and Network Rail have just launched a consultation on their plans for what they call the Croydon Bottleneck Scheme, designed primarily to unlock congestion on the Brighton Main Line, but does have the knock-on effect of allowing more frequent services to run through my constituency. And I'm encouraging constituents to take part to demonstrate the huge support that there is for putting on additional services once that is unlocked. And I would wonder if the Minister could comment on where the government sees the Croydon Bottleneck project and if it has its support. However, there are things that can be done in the here and now to help commuters once lockdown measures are eased. Firstly, there is an issue of safety, with the gap between the train and the platform at Hackbridge and Carshalton Beaches stations in particular being so high that even the use of ramps is not particularly safe. I have raised this with GTR and Network Rail, and I hope to see that platforms are heightened, at least in places, to make it safer to board and depart trains. Second is accessibility. The southbound platform at Carshalton Beaches does not have step-free access, so I've submitted a funding bid in order to help secure funding to deliver this, when I hope that will be favourably looked upon by the department. And finally, there is the issues of platforms themselves, with the platform at Hackbridge, for example, only being able to accommodate 7 cars. So if there could be an extension to allow it to accommodate 10, which it currently runs at peak services, that would reduce congestion on the concourse. These changes, plus a commitment to investment in infrastructure and the Croydon Bottleneck project, will help unlock many of the transport issues for our local constituents. But apart from trains, buses are the only other public transport option for my constituents. And I think it's fair to say, as we heard in the previous statutory instrument, that compared to other parts of the country, Carshalton and Wallington does have okay bus services, but they are certainly not perfect. Again, access is an issue for some, particularly those living in Clockhouse and the more rural parts of Carshalton beaches. It is possible to get around the borough fairly easily by the bus services that operate here, and the introduction of the Go Sutton bus, which TfL operated on a trial basis as an Uber-style on-demand bus service, travelling to more or less every part of the borough, was very welcome, and I hope the Minister would agree with me that TfL should seek to reinstate this service as soon as possible. It's currently suspended due to the coronavirus pandemic. There's also a number of bus services that go to and from Croydon, but there are a limited number of services that go outside the borough to any other destinations like Merton, Wandsworth or Kingston. There's also very few services indeed that travel southwards outside the Greater London Authority and into Surrey, which I share a border with, and I'll say more about this problem later. Again, as Carshalton and Wallington grows, connecting up to new destinations by bus, as well as increasing the frequency of some routes and making busier services double-decker, would help connect Sutton with its surrounding areas and make it easier to travel within the borough as well. However, improvements in the existing rail and bus networks are only part of the solution, and in order to reach our full potential, we do need new transport options. And of all the potential options, perhaps none has been discussed so long as the potential for a Sutton extension of the London Tramlink. Now, the long and convoluted history of the tram could be an adjournment debate in itself, so I won't bore the Minister with too much backstory, particularly as discussions about this started as early as 2002, only 2 years after the Croydon Tramlink was launched. However, I do want to draw attention to the fact that, sadly, if anything demonstrates that the current Mayor of London seems to forget that Sutton exists as a London borough, it is the Croydon Tramlink. When the current Mayor of London was a Transport Minister in this place, he said in 2010, and I quote, "I am not sure what the Mayor's priorities are, but they are not the Croydon Tramlink." How fitting that 10 years on, the same could be said for him. And in a London Assembly report released last year, it was shown that Sutton was dead last for investment from City Hall out of all the London boroughs. Just £16 million has been spent in the borough since the Mayor became elected in 2016. Compare that to example for £2.1 billion of investment for Newham. Now, the last Labour Mayor of London showed that he wasn't particularly interested in Outer London, and unfortunately the current Mayor seems to be following in his footsteps. Funding was set aside by the previous Conservative Mayor of London to help deliver this project, which equated to £100 million. Unfortunately, the current Mayor redistributed that funding. And after lobbying from our excellent London Assembly member, Steve O'Connell, he has agreed to set aside a smaller figure of £70 million to put towards the project. Sutton and Merton councils have also set aside some monies for this, but the overall projected cost of delivering the Sutton extension to the Tramlink has been rising considerably since it was first mooted. Now, perhaps if the Mayor hadn't driven down TfL's finances to such a state, particularly allowing Crossrail to get out of control, we wouldn't be in this position. Now, I said at the beginning of my remarks that technically my constituency does have 2 tram stops on the route. However, these are in the far northeast corner of my constituency, on the border with Croydon and Merton. They are behind an industrial estate and serve a very, very small number of residents who do live just outside the industrial area. The next residential streets are more than a 30-minute walk away, and they are much closer to other transport options. So extending the tram to Sutton would do wonders for the local economy, but also connect Carshalton and Wallington residents up with new destinations. TfL have completed a consultation now, agreed the route, and agreed indeed to go with the tram rather than the alternative bus rapid transit. But we are now at a standstill. The project is ready to move on to the next stage of official designs and indeed go into the planning system. And even the Mayor himself has said that he estimates that the first services could be in place in the next few years if there was no delay. But without any additional funding, this project won't go anywhere. Local, regional and national government, in my opinion, do need to come together on this issue to ensure that the consultation isn't just allowed to collect dust, become too expensive and ultimately consigned to the dustbin of history. So I wonder if the Minister could give me any view on how the government sees the Sutton extension of the Croydon Tramlink. However, as we do work towards this extension, if I could just indulge by throwing another possibility into the mix, Hackbridge is an important part of my constituency, which is experiencing considerable growth at the moment. The New Mill Quarter development is bringing 805 new homes and well over 1,000 new residents to the area. And Hackbridge definitely needs additional transport capacity to be able to cope with this. Now, Mitcham Junction, which is just one stop up the train line from Hackbridge, is currently where many residents go to intercept the tram. And I wonder if there is an argument for TfL doing exploratory works and extending the tram down the Network Rail line, running a single track, perhaps alongside the Network Rail route, in order to provide tram services to Hackbridge. And I hope the Minister would agree with me that it is at least worth TfL taking a look at this potential project. But next I'd like to draw attention to a potential other extension that I believe would benefit Carshalton and Wallington residents. And this is the potential to extend the London Overground service to Sutton via Wadden, Wallington and West Croydon. And this is something that I know that is backed by Neil Garrett, who is our excellent candidate for the London Assembly. The London Overground could connect local residents up to more destinations directly, which they cannot currently reach by making more than one change. And it's my understanding that Sutton was originally mooted as the end point for this service, but was decided to end at West Croydon instead because the feeling was that the London Overground service would be too popular by Sutton residents and would be too busy by the time it gets to Croydon. And I hope the Minister agrees with me that that is a nonsensical argument, because surely that only demonstrates the need for such a service and how much capacity it could increase on the line. And luckily, there is an existing rail line between Sutton and West Croydon, so in order to make this change happen, all that would have to happen is quite simply the trains would have to not stop and keep on going. Now, of course, I realise that things are never as quite simple as that, and there, of course, will be difficulties with congestion and potential timetable changes needed to deliver it. But I hope that the Minister would also agree that in the absence of a large infrastructure project being needed to see this project through to completion, it would be relatively easy to deliver and therefore is worth the work to put in to deliver it. But finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to touch on roads and pavements, because all too often in conversations about transport, roads and pavements are left out. As a borough with one of the highest car ownership rates in London, we see more than a quarter of journeys are done on foot, but more than half are done by car, according to the 2011 census. So conversations about roads and pavements are incredibly important. It's also important for residents of Carshalton and Wallington, because just as many, if not more, residents commute south into Surrey by car than do commute north into the city by train. And when talking about buses, I mentioned the difficulties about travelling south, and I do want to outline a problem that I believe many outer London boroughs suffer with, which is working across the Greater London Authority boundary. The border between the GLA and Surrey County Council is much firmer and more cumbersome than those between the London boroughs, and understandably so for many reasons. However, it does present difficulties when talking about transport, because TfL can essentially only look north, and Surrey has no jurisdiction in the area at all. Therefore, the road network between Sutton and Surrey does need to be strong to allow traffic to flow more easily without causing congestion. This must also include action to tackle potholes, and I'm grateful to the government for funding on potholes, which has drastically increased the amount of money that Sutton Council has to repair our roads. It's also important to make sure that our roads and pavements are safe for other road users, particularly pedestrians and cyclists. And again, I do want to thank the government for the funding to introduce new walking and cycling spaces, and I'm just sorry that the incompetent Lib Dem Council in Sutton did not see fit to work collaboratively to discuss these proposals, despite other councils managing to do it. And these new spaces must be safe and effective. I do worry that sometimes cycling routes can be seen as a box-ticking exercise with a few yards put here and there across boroughs which don't connect up and ultimately lead to nowhere. But these measures must also strike a balance with road users such as cars to ensure that there is no congestion on our roads. It is vital as we work towards a greener future, and safer roads will play an incredibly important part in that, to offer incentives to walk or cycle and indeed to use electric vehicles. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could say a little bit more about how the government is investing in safer streets. In bringing my remarks to a close, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just observe that transport is incredibly important for many reasons. Not only can it connect us up, but it also is able to help drive economic growth, and it will be playing a massive part in tackling the climate emergency. Carshalton and Wallington has been left growing without the investment to match it and without reaping much reward from being in a London borough. As one of the, if not the worst connected borough in London, it is no longer acceptable to not get our fair share of transport investment. And while some changes may take years, there are those that could be achieved very quickly indeed. And I hope that the Minister will agree that work should advance on these as soon as possible. We need to unlock the Croydon bottleneck to allow for more trains to run through the area. We need to make better use of bus services to connect us up with surrounding boroughs. The question mark over the tram needs erasing and replaced with a completion date. The London Overground needs to be extended in order to connect commuters to new destinations. And our roads and pavements must be safe and well maintained for all users.
Minister Chris Heaton-Harris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Carshalton and Wallington, and congratulate him on securing this debate on transport in his constituency, and his enlightening and constructive and extremely wide-ranging speech this evening. As a new Member of Parliament, he has a long list of things that he wants to achieve for his constituents, and I very much hope to spend some time guiding him down the right routes this evening, because I think he can achieve a number of his ambitions over his hopefully very long tenure in the seat. I've listened very carefully to my honourable friend's representations about transport services in Carshalton and Wallington. I will try and address most of them. He represents a fantastic constituency in a borough where I spent some of my formative political years campaigning. And I have very fond memories of those campaigns across the constituencies of my honourable friend and his neighbour, my honourable friend, the member for Sutton and Cheam. Some of my earliest political friendships were formed in and around my honourable friend's constituency. Not that you should do this, but Richard and Leslie Barber, Peter Guyringer, former councillor, current councillor, who's been around a fair bit in his time campaigning on these sorts of issues. It's really good to be able to have this trip, a joyous trip down memory lane, and address the content of my honourable friend's excellent speech. My honourable friend talked about the Tramlink extension that he would like to see to Sutton, the Sutton link. And as he knows and said, transport in London is devolved to the Mayor of London and delivered by Transport for London. And this matter, Madam Deputy Speaker, is not actually within my portfolio, but my honourable friend has well registered the importance of this extension to his constituents and his very, very strong ambitions in this area. He also talked about the various bus routes that some currently paused because of the COVID crisis. Fortunately, many still going. I know that TfL are listening to this debate tonight, but I will ensure that they reply directly to a number of the points that he made that actually are within their auspices. In rail, and as the Rail Minister, I can actually make some fairly solid suggestions and inform my honourable friend that this government's priority for the country is for the country's trains to run on time and to drive growth across the country by giving local leaders a greater say in the running of their railway. It's why we're investing record levels in rail funding in order to give the biggest rail modernisation programme this country, the biggest rail modernisation programme for over a century. In fact, we're spending £48 billion over what is called Control Period 6 in the jargon, which runs from the period 2019 to 2024 to improve rail services for passengers and freight customers whilst maintaining current high levels of safety and improving reliability. Part of this upgrading of reliability was mentioned in my honourable friend's speech when he talked about the upgrades to the Brighton Main Line, or as we like to call it in the trade, the BMUP, the Brighton Main Line Upgrade Programme, which my department and I recognise because the need to do, because we need to improve capacity on this line. It faces major performance challenges due to operational bottlenecks which currently prohibit additional capacity. In view of this, we've now committed over £50 million to improve the services on the Brighton Main Line and its connecting lines, which, if the upgrade scheme goes ahead, will benefit commuters in the region, including my honourable friends' constituents. Network Rail is currently working on the development of the Brighton Main Line Upgrade Programme, in which the main element would be a rebuild of the main line itself through central Croydon, comprising of additional tracks, platforms and flyovers to deconflict train movements. A small number of supporting schemes elsewhere on the route are also included within the programme, one of which is very important to my honourable friend. It is called the Wallington 12-car turnback. This element of the programme is to assist with the construction staging of Croydon to facilitate a more frequent service between West Croydon and Wallington, in my honourable friend's constituency, and to improve performance by decongesting the constrained West Croydon track layout and to aid overground growth. Network Rail is undertaking design work as well as land acquisition and extensive engagement on the Brighton Main Line upgrade programme, as my right honourable friend has mentioned, and his constituents should absolutely get involved in the ongoing consultations. The outline business case is due with the department next month, and in the subsequent weeks and months, a decision will be made on whether to progress and fund the next stage of the rail network enhancement pipeline to the final business case stage. Jargon for a very important gateway to investment. The department is currently considering if Wallington, alongside some other smaller Brighton Mainline upgrade programme schemes, should become independent schemes from the Brighton Mainline upgrade programme in order to complete enabling work quickly. Should this be funded, the work in Wallington is scheduled to be delivered in the next 3 years. My old friend talked about Govia Thameslink Railways, and in December 2018, the department announced that GTR would contribute £15 million towards tangible improvements for passengers in reaction to the service disruption following the May 2018 timetable changes, which many hundreds of my old friend's constituents would have written to a former rail minister to complain about. GTR has managed the engagement of passenger groups and stakeholders to determine what improvement schemes the programme would fund. The 3-month stakeholder engagement programme ended on the 31st of July last year, and over 4,000 responses were received to the surveys. From this, funding for the following shortlisted schemes will be delivered in my honourable friends' constituencies: Carshalton beaches, toilet and waiting room refurbishments, and cycle parking facilities, extremely important cycle parking facilities. I also am the Minister with responsibility for cycling. In Carshalton, a new toilet floor, repainting of the waiting rooms, additional platform seating, cycle parking facilities again, you might spot a theme, he might spot a theme, and landscaping and new signage. At Hackbridge, additional platform seating, a canopy over the ticket vending machine, which is actually unbelievably important for many of his constituents, a new platform waiting shelter and signage, and at Wallington, a new platform waiting shelter and additional platform seating. We expect the work on these matters, these schemes, to commence in the next couple of months. These are all stations, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've used in the past when I used to live in and around this area of London. And so I'm pleased, because I'm not sure they've had much of a refresh from when I moved out, that they're getting a refresh now. My honourable friend will also be pleased to hear that GTR's operational performance has improved in the past 12 months. Their current PPM is improved by 2 percentage points to 85.6%, and their on time has also gone up. Performance has also improved more specifically in my honourable friend's constituency. These figures take into account Southern and Thameslink services. The PPM is trains that arrive within 5 minutes of their scheduled time. During the rail periods in the current pandemic, PPMs have improved even further and are running at at or around 96%, and delivering a service that has allowed key workers to get to where they need to be in the last 12-13 weeks, delivered actually to those places by key workers in the rail industry. A further theme of my honourable friend's speech was that of accessibility. Delivering a transport system that is truly accessible to all is of huge importance to the government and personal importance to me. An accessible transport network is central to the government's wider ambition to build a society that works for all. Many stations date from a time when the needs of disabled customers were simply not considered, and therefore the situation at Carshalton beaches that my honourable friend described is unfortunately far from unique. As my honourable friend knows, the station was not selected for the last round of Access for All funding. This was chiefly because the programme was so amazingly heavily oversubscribed, and there were many other nominated stations within the London area with higher footfall. I know this was and is disappointing to my honourable friend, who has actively lobbied me on many occasions about this, and I hope he continues to do so in the future. But I would like to assure him that I take improving access seriously. In 2018, we published as a government an inclusive transport strategy, setting out what we are doing to improve access across all transport modes, and we will continue to seek further opportunities and funding to make more improvements. And where we can, I am pushing my department to do more and quicker. In addition, wherever infrastructure work is undertaken at a station by the industry, it must also comply with the relevant accessibility standards. My honourable friend may therefore wish to contact Network Rail, and I know he already has, but I think it might be worth a further conversation to see if any work is planned that might actually trigger these requirements. In the meantime, if a person cannot use the station, they can book alternative transport, which the industry is obliged to provide at no additional cost. So I guess I should conclude now by thanking my honourable friend, the member for Carshalton and Wallington, for securing this debate. As I'm sure he appreciates, rail plays a very important part in people's lives across the country, and especially in his constituency. As I say, I used to commute from stations around it in my time. Today he brought up a huge, wide, diverse range of issues, and I want to reassure the House that this government is investing record levels in rail funding, in buses, in cycling, and a whole host of other areas, pothole filling, to deliver the best transport infrastructure we possibly can, and the biggest rail modernisation programme for over a century. As I mentioned earlier, we've committed over £50 million on improving services on the Brighton Main Line and its connecting lines, an upgrade that will absolutely be able to improve the lot of commuters across the region, including from my honourable friend's constituency.